It's finally time to have a butcher's at Just Trains' second route add-on for Train Sim World, which features a section of the West Coast Main Line through Lancashire, the Lake District, and into Cumbria. I had high hopes for this route, considering JT's good reputation from the Blackpool Branches route of 2023, not to mention Dovetail's comparatively underwhelming London to Milton Keynes route, which had a rough initial release, but has since been saved by a huge timetable mod and enhancement pack. Here are my 2 cents on WCML Preston to Carlisle, and before we go any further, I recommend reading the rather substantial manual for this route. There is simply too much information for me to A, fully wrap my head around, and B, fit in this video. This add-on was released on the 21st of November 2024 and costs a staggering $64.49 NZD at full price on Steam. That's as much as an entire game these days. Ordinarily, I'm not prepared to pay that much money for a single TSW add-on, regardless of whatever reason the developers may have for setting the price as high as they did, so I waited until the route went on a discount. In the end, I picked it up for $58.04, because Dovetail were offering a 10% discount on the route during their February 2025 Festival of Rail. Granted, $58.04 is still more expensive than the previous standard route price, but I suppose any discount on the WCML is better than nothing. Besides the Preston to Carlisle section of the West Coast Main Line, which is around 90 miles long, you also get Carlisle Kingmore Depot, plus the marshalling yard itself, and the branch from Lancaster to Morecambe Promenade, the latter being the old terminus prior to the branch being truncated to the current Morecambe station in 1994. Annoyingly, Just Trains didn't properly include the branches from Morecambe to Heysham or Oxenholme to Windermere. You can clearly see on the 2D map that they actually laid the track for the Heysham and Windermere branches, but why they didn't make those sections drivable is anyone's guess. In addition to being a remake of the old WCML Overshap route in TS Classic, this is a continuation of the Blackpool Branches route, which also featured Preston Station. Indeed, you can use TSW5's route hopping feature to get between the two routes without having to go back to the main menu. I've noticed that, since TSW5's release, a lot of routes have taken advantage of route hopping. I dare say it would probably save the developers a bit of work because they could just reuse part of an existing route. Personally, I don't mind the route hopping feature, but I also don't want to see too many new routes that just reuse part of an existing one. Take notes, Dovetail. On the motive power scene, the star of the show is the Class 87 electric locomotive of 1973, so you could also call this thing the James Blunt engine. More specifically, you get the 35-strong Class 87-0 variant. The one off 87-1, number 87101 Stevenson, is nowhere to be seen. The Class 08, Class 47-4 and Class 101 return with Preston to Carlisle, so you don't need to own the Northern Transpennine route and BR Heavy Freight pack to get the DMU and extra locomotives. But at the same time, I can imagine this being annoying for people who have already got the NTP, BR Heavy Freight, Tees Valley and Blackpool packs, because now they've bought the Class 08, Class 47 and Class 101 3 times. Besides the Class 87, another new addition to TSW is the Mark IIIA passenger coaches in British Rail blue and grey or Intercity Executive liveries. While we already had Mark III coaches with the Great Western Express and Midland Mainline routes, those variants don't have buffers because they worked with HST power cars. while the Mark III's do have buffers, and can therefore be hauled by normal locomotives. I should also mention the fact that Just Trains are working on a Class 86 add-on for TSW5, but it hasn't been released yet at the time of this video's production. The Class 87 in TSW comes with two liveries, namely Intercity Executive and British Rail Blue, plus neutral section functionality, sounds recorded by Armstrong Powerhouse, authentic physics, a cold start procedure, and a large selection of 3D nameplates. The Class 87 is capable of reaching 110 miles per hour, which is the highest permitted speed for non-tilting trains on the West Coast Main Line. Come to think of it, if Just Trains could do neutral section functionality for the Class 87 right out of the gate, why was the Class 350 in the London to Milton Keynes route initially released without neutral section functionality? Here's a short demonstration of the machine room on the Class 87, although you do have to crouch down before walking through here due to the limited head clearance. I don't recall seeing that many electric locomotives in TSW that have a fully modelled machine room between the cabs. Other locomotives with this feature that come to mind include the Deutsche Bahn BR143, albeit on only one side, and the Amtrak ACS64, which also has a machine room down the centre like the Class 87. This rendition of the Class 87 is slightly easier to drive, and has a better model, than the Armstrong Powerhouse/Wagons version in TS Classic, although it still features the unconventional tap changer system. I recommend reading the manual, or playing the tutorial, if you're not familiar with how the tap changer works. Meanwhile, the liveries you get for the Class 47 are the same as what's included in the Blackpool route, namely stock standard BR Blue, BR Large Logo Blue, and Intercity Executive, with all liveries featuring high-intensity headlights. The engines that come with Preston to Carlisle have an extra variant each, with the only difference between that and the normal one being the way the area around the marker lights is painted. And the second variant of the Intercity livery also says ScotRail on it for some reason. An impressive 6 livery variants for the Class 08 are included with this route, although 4 of them are just different workshops' applications of British Rail Blue, named as Type A through Type C. Sorry, Type D. That was a slip of the tongue. The ones that interest me the most are the special livery worn by 08744 Wigan TMD, and that heavily weathered version of BR Blue Type C. 08744 Wigan TMD is the dedicated shunter at Preston, albeit with only 5 timetable mode services, and only one of them is in daylight. As for the heavily weathered one, that is only used for one service, where she is shunting at Hardendale Quarry, near Shap Summit. In this weathered state, the Class 08 reminds me of a certain scene from the Dark Railway series, although I can't remember what the episode was called. I think it was made before Season 7 or 8, if that helps. The Class 101 is notable for A, being Daisy's basis, and B, the only first-generation British DMU that's currently in TrainSim World, although that'll change whenever the blasted Peak Forest expansion pack is finally released, as that will include the Class 104. The 101 that you get with Preston to Carlisle has received numerous updates to bring it up to a more modern standard than its original Northern Transpennine condition. Improvements included, but are not limited to, new suspension physics, which are especially noticeable when you're going through points and around corners. Then there's better exhaust effects, a retextured interior, which doesn't look too bad in my opinion, destination blinds more suitable for the WCML route, compatibility with TSW5's guard mode, and lastly, better audio, although I can't remember if this horn sound is modded or not. Either way, I think it sounds better than the default one you get on the Northern Transpennine and Tees Valley versions. The full timetable mode features 123 playable services for the Class 87, 106 for the Class 47, 133 for the Class 101, and only 29 for the Class 08. There's a reduced timetable for 8th gen consoles, although I question why Dovetail is still bothering to support those older consoles. In any case, the Class 101 DMU is mainly used to run services on the branch to Morecambe Promenade, while the 87 is the dominant motive power on WCML passenger and freight services. And I initially thought that the 47 services would largely be the same as those for the 87, but it seems that most of them are either just light engine shunts or shorter freight runs. For some reason, the 3-car Class 101 only has 6 services, while the 2-car variant has 127 services. Besides the shunting turns at Preston Station and Hardendale Quarry, the Class 08 is also used to haul trip-working freight trains in the Carlisle area. All of these services are realistic for the time period, which, like Blackpool branches, is the year 1986. Come to think of it, it would be pretty cool to see the Class 370 advanced passenger train in TSW at some point, since they were still in service in 1986, although that wasn't too far away from their retirement. Rolling stock from other British add-ons also layers/substitutes into timetable mode on the Preston to Carlisle route, either for playable services or to just populate the sidings. The add-ons you'll need for those layers/substitutions are Blackpool branches, West Cornwall local, Tees Valley line, Northern Transpennine, barely captures the Spirit of Steam, the Class 31, Class 20, LNER A3 Pacific number 60103 Flying Scotsman, and even the green Class 47 from that disastrous ECML diesel rail tour pack. The total cost of all those add-ons on Steam is a staggering $362 New Zealand dollars at full price, and I certainly don't recommend buying them all at full price. You'd be much better off waiting for a sale. I don't really understand why Flying Scotsman has a layer on the Preston to Carlisle route, since the TSW version only depicts the locomotive in his post-2016 BR green condition. As such, he is unrealistic for a route set in 1986. The LMS Jubilee 460, from Spirit of Steam or Peak Forest, is in a similar situation, except this model in TSW depicts the locomotive in a working days condition, not the preservation era. This version of the Jubilee doesn't have a speedometer, AWS, GSMR and TPWS, so it's completely unrealistic to see this thing on the main line in a post-Steam era setting. When I was exploring the route for the first time, I ended up spending a lot of time at the old Morecambe station. Things that I noticed were the giant Ferris wheel and roller coaster clearly visible from the station, some disused sidings near the platform, a model ship in a display promoting ferry services to Douglas on the Isle of Man, a rail tour poster that uses a real photograph of Class 20s at York, with a Class 141 Pacer visible on the left, and this high-vis randomly dumped on a buffer stop. I was surprised to see that you can leave the station building and walk across the road to the promenade. This reminds me of Lindau Hauptbahnhof on S-Bahn Vorarlberg, in a sense. I like being able to walk along the promenade because it adds so much more to the immersion, although it is a bit weird to not see a single NPC out here. Just up the road from the railway station, I noticed a shop called Polwert's. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think this is meant to be a stand-in for Woolworths, also known as Woolies. In any case, we have a chain of supermarkets that's also called Woolies here in Australia and New Zealand, but ours is nothing like the old British version. Thinking back to the ship in a glass case, I'd love to see a route from the Isle of Man in Train Sim World, preferably a combined Manx Electric Railway and Great Laxey Mine Railway add-on. The latter has two very unusual steam locomotives named Ant and Bee. The two lines meet at Laxey, which I initially got confused with Axley on the Dark Railway, and I can imagine the player coming in on the electric rail car from Douglas or Ramsey and walking down past the big wheel to see the tiny steamers. As I started exploring the Morecambe branch, I noticed that the interior of the signal box at Bear Lane is fully detailed and accessible, although you cannot move the big levers. Another non-functioning prop I noticed was this panel with buttons to activate the level crossing. Meanwhile, other buildings with detailed and accessible interiors can be found at all the stations throughout the route, with this example being at Lancaster. You can also walk into a sizable number of signal boxes besides the one at Bear Lane, but for the purposes of this video, I'll only show one more example after this one at Morecambe. The next example is back on the main line at Hest Bank, where the box's architecture is noticeably more modern than the box at Morecambe. Incidentally, this box has the same crossing panel as the one at Bear Lane, and Hest Bank is the only point on the entire West Coast main line where the track actually runs past the coast, although you'll probably get less than a minute to actually see it. For some reason, even the toilets are fully modelled at least 4 stations, namely Lancaster, Morecambe, Carnforth, and Penrith. I have no idea what to make of this tiny addition, so swiftly moving on. Other random details I spotted at Penrith were 2 posters in the main waiting room that feature real photographs of Black 5 steam locomotives, a gas heater substituting for a wood fire elsewhere in the station, and the ruins of Penrith Castle across from the station on Ullswater Road. Even with such a long route with lots of detail and a busy rail scene, performance on WCML Preston to Carlisle was better than I expected, averaging between 50 and 60 FPS most of the time. However, I was still getting semi-frequent stuttering. One wonders if Dovetail will ever get their act together and fix this game's piss-poor optimization. Oh, and I also saw this NPC glitched through the platform at Oxenholme. Why does this sort of thing still happen? In terms of its overall quality, I would go so far as to say that Just Trains' second TSW route is one of the best in the entire game, although the inability to drive to Heysham and Windermere is still annoying. With good ambient audio and an absurdly high amount of custom assets throughout the route, not to mention a great rendition of the Class 87, the experience on WCML Preston to Carlisle puts a lot of Dovetail routes to shame, and simultaneously, leaves Rivet Games' infamous West Cornwall local and S-Bahn Central Schweiz coughing and spluttering in the dust. I like seeing routes that are set well in the past, because it's interesting to see how certain places looked back then and compare it with how that same place looks now. Case in point, Morecambe Promenade, which happens to be my favourite station on the route. However, I'm still of the belief that no Train Sim World add-on is worth anywhere near as much as $64.49 at full price, regardless of how good it may be. The amount I paid for this route was still fairly large, but a little bit more reasonable than full price. Even with that elephant in the room, I still think Preston to Carlisle is deserving of a 9 out of 10, and I look forward to the Class 86 and other future DLC from Just Trains.